Good evening, everyone. I'm Joel Angelillo, one of the members of the MetroWest Climate Solutions Steering Committee. We're happy you could join us tonight. If this is your first MetroWest Climate Solutions seminar, welcome. And if you're a regular attendee to our seminars, welcome back. The MetroWest Climate Solutions is a partnership of local groups who want to speed our path to a healthier carbon neutral world, a partnership that includes the First Parish of Wayland, First Parish of Weston, First Parish of Lincoln, Sustainable Weston Action Group, Energize Wayland, and a growing list of other local organizations. Since 2019, we have been holding roughly monthly public sessions on climate-related issues. Topics have ranged from Beacon Hill legislation to offshore wind, and tonight's topic, induction versus gas stoves. And you can hardly read a newspaper today without seeing some press release about how gas stoves are a significant source of indoor pollution, in addition to using more energy to boil water. It's a very timely topic tonight. So if you'd like to receive news of upcoming MetroWest Climate Solution events, as well as events hosted by other local organizations, go to metrowestclimatesolutions.org to sign up for our newsletter. You'll also find there recordings of our previous sessions. Speaking of which, this session is being recorded and will be available soon on our website. Now, we encourage your questions during the session. We want questions. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, the Q&A button to type in your questions. Someone will be monitoring the Q&A button and sending your questions to our speakers. So at this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Tom Walker, who will introduce our two speakers this evening. Tom.
Thanks, Joel. We have a very interesting program tonight that addresses the health and, to some extent, climate impacts of gas stoves in our homes. We designed the program to give you both an understanding of the science behind these concerns, as well as a guide to shopping for solutions. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. John Levy. John's a professor and chair of the Department of Environmental Health at Boston's University's School of Public Health. His research includes characterization of indoor and outdoor air pollution in homes and the implications for health. This includes studies of the contributions of gas stoves to air pollution and also to asthma. He's worked on these issues for over 25 years and brings a deep understanding and really long-term perspective to this issue. He's also been involved in environmental justice issues. And while it's not directly relevant to tonight's talk, given the prominence of the proposed expansion at Hanscom Airfield in the MetroWest area, I'll mention that he's also recently done research on the health impacts of living near airports. John's talk tonight will also touch on climate to some extent and the greenhouse gas issues associated with using gas for cooking. Our second speaker is Steve Scheinkopf. Steve is the CEO of Yale Appliance, which probably most of us are familiar with if we've lived in the area for a while. He has over 38 years of experience in the appliance industry, and he's an extremely knowledgeable source of information for consumers on appliances, which in our case tonight means options for replacing gas stoves in your kitchen with new electric induction ranges and cooktops. Steve's been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Consumer Reports, the Boston Globe, Bloomberg Radio, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Entrepreneur, for his knowledge on how to buy appliances and appliance repair. I'll just say I love to cook and have always hated conventional electric stoves. I can't seem to not burn things when I use them. I took a stroll through the Yale Appliance website and quickly realized how little I understand about induction stoves. So I'm really looking forward to learning from Steve about what I need to be thinking about, particularly since it's time to replace our 25-year-old gas range. So with no further ado, let me hand things over to John to tell us a little bit about the science behind the air pollution effects of gas stoves. John?
All right, thanks so much, Tom. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully successfully. Okay, looks like hopefully folks can see the slides okay. So I'm going to be pretty brief. I think the Q&A and the discussion will probably be most interesting. And just want to kind of hit a few high notes about gas stoves and air pollution and health. And so first, I mean, probably for this group, this is pretty well known, but just to ground everyone, and there's been a lot about gas stoves in the news over the past year. Certainly a lot of hubbub in Congress and among politicians, a lot of actions at the state and local level in Massachusetts and elsewhere talking about banning natural gas in buildings. You can see headlines here about, gas stoves could be as bad as cigarettes. And so all sorts of comparisons. The bottom right is actually a pretty interesting report that just came out earlier this week about the gas industry and how they've tried to promote gas stoves and try to sort of change a little bit of the science there. So there's been a lot in the past year. I mean, I think the middle quote, which is a headline from USA Today earlier this year, is probably the most important right now. Like, is this really a problem? And also, why has this become such a big deal all of a sudden? So where I wanted to start was just kind of the basics, make sure that we're all on the same page, and put together a few things that I think are pretty hard to argue with. So the first is when you burn a fuel, natural gas, but any fuel, you generate nitrogen dioxide. So the air around us is largely nitrogen. You put it at high temperature, you get nitrogen dioxide. So that we know, that's kind of basic chemistry 101. The other thing we know is nitrogen dioxide is a respiratory irritant. This has been known for a really long time. When EPA was first established in the early 1970s, they came up with these 6 criteria air pollutants, which are air pollutants where we knew lots of people were exposed to them, and there was a lot of evidence of health effects. NO2 is one of those. So we've known what NO2 can do for a very long time. And I think the important thing to think about is when you think about your home, right? A gas stove is often the only combustion source in your home that you spend a lot of time around, and that's not always vented to the outdoors, right? So you might have gas furnace, gas water heater, but you're not probably hanging out next to them for a long amount of time. You're certainly not usually next to the flame, and those are always vented to the outdoors. Gas stoves in kitchens, sometimes you've got those vents, sometimes you don't. So it's quite clear a gas stove will give you NO2. NO2 can be a respiratory irritant, especially for people with diseases like asthma. So that's not the interesting question. The interesting question is, how much does it contribute? Is this a tiny amount of exposure, a large amount of exposure? And does that matter for health and for whose health? Just one other set of basics, again, just to make sure we're on the same page. We're focusing here, I'm focusing here on indoor pollution and indoor pollution inside your home. And a lot of folks in environmental health focus on that for the simple point that we spend most of our time indoors, probably, 23, 22 hours a day indoors. And a lot of that is inside your home. So that's where your exposure to air pollution comes from. Some of that comes from the outdoors and infiltrates in, but a good amount also comes from sources inside your home. And then what those sources contribute to your exposure depend on a few things. Obviously, how much you use the source, like a gas stove, and how much it emits. Also, just how big your home is. If you have a larger space, you have more dilution. Smaller space, it's more concentrated. Air exchange, how much the air is exchanging with the outdoors. So that's just turnover, cleaning the air in the home. And then spot ventilation. Do you have a range hood in the kitchen or other for sources of combustion, other ways where you're pulling the emissions out? So those are really the factors that are going to drive how much your exposure is. So there's been a ton of literature and a lot of studies on this. What I'm showing here is a study that I was involved in a long time ago. This was published in 1998. As Tom mentioned, I've been engaged in this work for a while. And I put this up here just because, to show that this has been looked at for a very long time. And it really actually captures the basics here. So in this study, we looked at NO2 across, I think it was 18 cities in 15 countries around the world, and wanted to understand in all these different places, Boston being one of them, what really drove your exposure to NO2. So we had measurements inside people's homes, we had measurements outside their homes, in their workplaces, and then personal measurements. So there was a little thing you could clip on your shirt, and that gave a sense of what your personal exposure was. And what I'm showing here in the plot is the ratio between the indoor level and the outdoor level in people's homes. So if it's one, same indoors and outdoors. And what this showed is there are some places where the indoors are way lower than the outdoors. You can see Berlin, Ottawa, so forth. Other places at the bottom where the indoors are actually substantially higher than the outdoors. So a lot of variation across these cities. And when we looked at what factors were driving these differences and what were driving people's exposures, gas stoves were the top predictor. And you can see on the bottom, that was the strongest predictor. If you had a gas stove, you had about 35 parts per billion of NO2. If you didn't, it was 21. So all the other sources combined, traffic, everything else in your life gave you 21. The gas stove gave you another 14 in this case on average, more for some people, less for others. So to me, this was one of the first studies on the topic I was involved in. It was eye-opening to me. I hadn't thought that much about indoor pollution. Like intuitively, it seems like a major highway should give you a lot more exposure than that one stove in your home. But again, it's being emitted in a very concentrated space in your home, and the concentrations can get quite high. This is just another older study just to kind of reinforce the message. This was a few years later where we were looking in a few different Boston Housing Authority developments and did the same sort of thing. We measured NO2 inside the homes and outside the homes. And in these developments, which were largely close to major roads, the outdoor levels, that's the part on the right on the plot, were about half as much as what you measured inside the home. And it was higher in the kitchen than in the living room. And these were all, I should say, units that had gas stoves. And so here you had the presence of the gas stove. You had pretty small spaces. They were not well ventilated. We sort of measured that separately to look at air exchange. So you had all the factors that are going to contribute to high amounts of NO2. And so again, you could see in the kitchen, in the heating season, you're getting to about 50 versus the outdoors, which is about 20. So that gas stove is giving you more than every other source of pollution, kind of all pulled together. So this slide is impossible to read, but it's kind of by design. I wanted to just talk for a couple minutes about health effects of NO2 and reinforce that, again, we've known about this for a really long time. So EPA, when they look at these criteria air pollutants, they pull together all the evidence of health effects and put a report together. You can tell kind of by the weird font here that this is an older report. This is from 1982 that EPA put together. The table, I don't know if you can see the table heading, the Zoom controls are blocking it for me, but it says this is all the studies that they had about respiratory illness in homes that have gas stoves. So, and this table actually went on for 3 pages. This is just a snapshot of it. So already in the early 80s, there was a lot of evidence out there trying to get at what gas stoves were contributing to NO2 and what that was doing for health, especially among those who had asthma and other respiratory illness. And so, of course, there's been a lot more studies since the 70s. You know, a lot of this work has been replicated and our knowledge has gotten fancier, but it's still the same essential thing. What this diagram is showing, like, don't worry about all the details, that we're just fast forwarding here about 40 plus years to another EPA report summarizing what we know about the health effects of NO2. And as time has gone on, there's, again, some nuances and intricacies, but big picture, if you go from the left, inhalation of NO2, all the way kind of to the upper right, you can see effects on asthma exacerbation, so asthma attacks for folks who have asthma, as well as development of asthma if you're exposed to NO2 for a long time. And that last one is pretty important because looping back to that question of why is this suddenly in the news and why is there a big hubbub, there was a study last year, again, people probably saw the headlines about it, that said that exposure to gas stoves in homes was responsible for about 12% of childhood asthma in the United States. And I think that study triggered a lot of this recent conversation. But what that study was actually doing was really just summarizing the implications of all of this other literature, all these other health studies that linked NO2 to the development of asthma. So again, it felt like new information that people were seeing last fall or winter, whenever that was, but it was really very old information that was getting repackaged, resummarized, and then contributing to all new controversies. So this is my last slide, and I'm happy to elaborate on any points as we go along. Tom mentioned the climate connection. That is clearly really important. A lot of this discussion about swapping out stoves has to do with the climate part of the story. And just a couple of points I want to make here. Methane, which is what natural gas mostly is a potent greenhouse gas. It's stronger than CO2. That has a lot of climate forcing. Gas stoves are not a big part of our total inventory. So a study said it was about 0.1%. So just swapping out your gas stove for induction is not going to solve climate change. Of course, every little bit makes a difference, but there's been some really important points about how the gas industry has thought about gas stoves as almost like a gateway technology, right? If you have a gas stove, you're much more likely to have gas heat, gas hot water, and people don't have much emotional connection to their gas hot water heater, but they do to their gas stove. And so it's been very important to the gas industry to have folks keep gas stoves as a way to keep gas into the home. And I provide a link here to an interesting article in The Conversation earlier this year that talked about this. The story I mentioned earlier from NPR that talked about kind of the gas industry practices really reinforced that point about how they saw gas stoves as really central to maintaining gas as a key fuel for homes. So I'll stop there. Again, happy to elaborate or answer any questions, and looking forward to learning some from Steve now about the technologies.
Okay, Steve,
All right, let me see if I can share my screen here.
we'll take questions for both speakers as soon as Steve is done.
And I did. Before I get started, great job, Professor Levy. There's a couple things everybody should know that no one talks about. And I think it's really interesting. And you can stay on the line, Professor. We can chat about it for just a little bit. The average gas burner when I started in 1986 was 10,000 BTUs at its high, right? It was 2 10s and 2 8s. The average BTU of a front burner that people use now is somewhere around 20. When you add pro ranges together, you get roughly the equivalent of 4 of them. There's some that'll go to 25,000 BTU. So we're talking about gas ranges that are double what they used to be back when I was, and I hadn't even planned this in the as part of my presentation, but you're looking at double the output at the same time, right? Building, windows, building material, all that stuff stays in your house longer, right? Because passive home LEED certifications about air infiltration, exfiltration. So what's happening now is not only are you producing more of it, it's staying longer in your house, right? So that's the real danger. It's like this was never a thing before, because my mom cooked on an old caloric, and it was roughly 8,000 BTU per burner. Now you're looking at 20, 25. Heston's at 30,000. Your walk burners are at 35,000 BTUs. So that's why you see the real increase of asthma. And that's it. That's my one thing that I'm glad I don't have to be the one talking about toxic fumes. So anyway, we're going to talk about induction cooking, the good and the bad. And we're going to cover pretty much everything. How it might be right, wrong, new ranges. I'm going to show you some prototypes never been seen before, and some problems if you want to convert. So I want to just start with a brief, I call it weird history of induction. We're involved with a lot of energy efficient products. I was doing a webinar on heat pumps. They said, can you do something on this new technology? Like new, it's been around since 1856. Induction's been around since invented in 1933. Westinghouse had the first cool tops in 1973. Sears had their range in the 80s, and it went dark. In 1995, the only company you could buy an induction range was a company from Canada called Diva. It was $4,000 for a 4-burner, 30-inch induction stovetop. And then in 2009, Panasonic made. Now, you're seeing a lot more induction. Now, is it good citizenry? Is it the fact that it has less fumes coming off, or is it because the state governments like New York, Boston, San Francisco, LA have banned gas ranges in their multi-unit? I'm inclined to believe it's a little bit of both. So with that, let's talk about how induction works. And it's very important to understand that induction's magnetic heat, right? So it bypasses the glass and excites the metal molecules of your pan. So your pan cooks the food. Bypass the glass, and all sorts of good things happen when you bypass glass when you're cooking, right? And These are some of them. We're going to get into all of them. And first, I want to tell you about my range. I moved to an apartment last year, and I had this old electric range. So I went and bought a Heston portable induction. Now, it's only 120. So I can tell you that it did a better job than the 220-volt electric, except on big pot stuff, right? But when you talk about something that is super easy to clean, super easy to control, induction at 120 almost does as well as electric at 240. That's just my my take on it. But if we're talking about stove on stove, the hottest stove you can buy is a Blue Star. It's 25,000 BTUs. And the hottest induction single burner is the LG at 4,000. And there's no question, the fastest to boil is going to be induction. And because it's electronic, you're going to get a simmer, an infinite simmer. You could simmer at 1 watt. Whereas, gas, they talk about, Thermo talks about their low simmer, the ultra simmer by SKS has come out. The most it goes down to 100 BTU, because remember, if you do your lighter, at a certain level, the flame's going to blow out because of a lack of oxygen. So you're going to get much better output, much better simmer with induction. Cleanability, absolutely. People say, well, gas is sealed, but if you spill something on a hot burner, you still have to clean it. It's more so in electric, right? Because if you boil something and it goes in the top and it gets heated, it's almost impossible to clean. Same thing with that gas burner, that star burner, which is the easiest. But because you get because the top doesn't heat up, right? Because the top doesn't heat up, the glass stays cool. The only heat you're going to get is the residual from the pot down. So basically, you could wipe that down very easy. It's never going to burn to the glass. So it's much more cleanable, easier to vent. Remember, when you're talking about 25,000 BTU burn, 40% of that, or 10,000 BTUs, is lost to heat. So that's why when you go into a showroom like a Yale, they've got these big pro vents. The reason is because there's a lot of residual heat that comes out. Now, I still believe that you need to vent induction, but you don't need as much CFM as you do on a gas. And it's better for your environment. Now, this slide I can throw away because I think Professor Levy covered it way better than I did. But even in something like this picture right here, this is a bad application, because remember that any burning of fats does create some kind of nitrogen oxide, and you need to vent. Whether you're talking about electric, induction, or gas, the more you cook, the more you need to vent. We have some free resources on our blog. You can download our venting buying guide. It's free. You just put your name and email address. And then it's safe, because you can't accidentally turn this thing on. It needs to sense metal, so your child will never be able to turn this on without a middle pot being on it. Now, you could say that in gas, but again, after you shut the gas off, it looks perfectly normal. Same thing with electric. Let's just get the hot surface indicators of those dots. But these stay hot for quite some time. Induction doesn't. So it's the safest for kids as well. All right. Now, here's some of the reasons why inductions could be the wrong choice. Now, I don't know why I put this picture, and it's kind of cool. Half induction, half gas. It's kind of the way it's going. But it's really hard to replace an existing gas stove. Let me show you why, right? Right on the left, we have the bad application induction range. On the right, we've got the Wolf dual fuel, right? Here's the difference, 12 amps to 50 amps, right? So somewhere you're gonna make 38 amps, and you probably don't have an electric box. You have to change it you have to change the circuit and wire it all the way to the socket in your right next to the range. I estimate that, well, it's more of an estimation, it's $3,500 to get that changed out, right? So it's not inconsequential. And then you have the power outages. We don't have problems in MetroWest, but in a power outage, you can always light a gas burner. You can't light a induction. And then your reliability. This is kind of I focused on ranges. The cooktops are reliable. The reason why induction ranges are less so is because if you get voltage spikes, the induction range will use typically 50 amps. The ones that are most reliable, like Bosch, was 5% this year. They use 40 amps. What happens when a spike will fry that control panel? Now, what you can do for an electrician is buy what's called a smoother. That'll smooth a spike, so you're not going to get that through your range. You can buy them on Amazon for about $600. Again, grilling, you can't grill on induction. You can griddle with some really good bridge burners. You can't use it as a French top per se, which means you have one big burner and it spreads the heat outward, kind of like the French burners on a gas range. So can't do that, can't grill. You can griddle on this now, I suspect. All right, here's some interesting ranges to buy. Now, again, we talk about induction. Should I buy induction? I'm going to focus on the ranges, but let's look at the cooktops. Probably the best cooktop you can buy. This is the Thermador range that they just manufactured 30 and 36. It's based on the Liberty sensor technology, where you can set it for 3 temperatures. So if you're boiling rice and you want to cool it and then warm it, you can do that by sensor driven on the Thermador. A lot of the better inductions have the bridge elements. See that on the right hand side? Those are bridges that you can light up the whole burner at different temperatures. Then you got Bosch. Bosch is the most reliable, although not this one. This is the one they import from Italy. This one should have problems, so you may want to stick away from this. But the Bosch slide-in is the most reliable at 5%. Again, you're going to get induction, and then you're going to get a warm draw underneath it. And then Wolf. If Thermo has the best top, then Wolf has the best convection system. They use blowers, and they have their Wolf Gourmet that'll tell you tell it what the meat is, how you want it cooked, and it'll give you time, temperature, even rack position. So that would be perhaps the best range. And then for a top, you want to look at bridge elements and then power elements in the middle if you're getting a 36. New prototypes. This is the new Gmod. I took a picture. It was at we had an innovation summit last week in our showroom. This is the new market. You're going to see a lot more 36s because, again, that typically in larger luxury buildings, you can't put gas in there anymore. So you're going to start seeing a lot more induction in the bigger sizes. And this is a brand new range that nobody's seen except for you. This is the Fisher Vacal 48 that's due out first quarter next year. Blue Star is coming out with theirs. Miele is coming out with bigger ranges. I'm sure Wolf will follow. So you're going to be able to get typically the main size that everybody has in their house is 30-inch. Now you're going to get 36 and 48-inch, where typically you would get a pro range. So here's some questions on how to choose. First, do you have available amperage, and are you willing to basically redo that whole electrical? And then you want to pick the combination of features in the cooktop, and I can answer some of those questions and arrange the best suits your cooking style. And then make sure it can be delivered in service, because especially if you have spikes and you pick a range and you don't get any hardware to prevent that, you may need a service within 3 to 5 years. With that, I'll say thank you, and I'll turn it over to the powers that be. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note, we're honored to have here, I noticed on the call here, Chef Bouchard, who is the creator of the website Kitchens to Life, a private chef and a cooking appliance trainer, as well as a consultant to the appliance industry. So Chef, I also believe that we've just given you panelist access. So if you wanted to say a few words, please indicate or chime in to that effect, but welcome. So a number of questions have come in. And one of the first ones, which I've heard before, is about pacemakers. Can you say anything about pacemakers and induction stoves?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think Rochelle needs a little better introduction. I met her about 6 years ago, and her ostensible goal was to ban gas ranges in California. I think she wanted to see my induction buyer's guide. And I'm like, sure, have at it. And good luck to you. But her and her whole committee was single-handedly successful in beating back, the gas lobby. And, she deserves a lot of credit for that. It's because of her is really set aside this whole move to electrification in homes, not just in gas, but in, in the whole home. So anyway, to answer that question, the answer is newer pacemakers shouldn't be a problem, but some of the older ones may be. Talk about the electrical pulse that comes off a induction range. The best advice, because I'm not a doctor and I don't know what pacemaker people have, is to really check with your doctor. That's my best piece of advice. Now, if you had to ask me whether it should affect it or not, the answer to that's probably not. But you really need an outside medical opinion.
I guess this one is for you, John. Are there other sources of nitrous oxide in the home besides the gas stoves? And are there other worrisome gases besides nitric oxides from gas stoves?
Yes, I mean, part one, there's not a lot actually. Again, you're getting NO2 from burning fuel in more of an open space. The amount that your gas furnace is contributing is pretty minimal because that's getting vented outside. If somebody smokes in the home, that gives you a little bit of NO2, but that really, gas-fired appliances like stoves are pretty much the dominant source inside of home. In terms of other pollutants, there definitely are plenty that come along for the ride with natural gas. There's been some studies that look at benzene, for example, and other air toxics that are found in the gas, and those are elevated as well in homes that use gas stoves. Some of that happens when you're cooking. Some of that is just, slow leakage even when you're not cooking. And there's been studies that have really kind of looked at, obviously, if you have a pronounced gas leak, that's a problem and that has to be addressed for a lot of reasons. But there's, a lot of settings where you might have a small amount of gas coming out even when you're not in the combustion process. So again, some air toxics, whether they're at levels of concern is certainly debatable and under discussion, but they certainly are detected in indoor spaces.
Okay.
Excuse me, Steve, could I ask you to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Sorry about that.
No problem.
My bad.
And back to you, Steve. I'm not sure if you answered this one directly, but are there any 48-inch induction ranges that can withstand the prolonged high heat during canning operations?
I think Rochelle might be better because she actively cooks in these exotic ways. I'm more of a boil it, stir fry it type of guy. But right now, the only 48-inch that's out is an Aga Mercury, and it's probably not something you want. I don't think it's made very well. Blue Star, I saw the new Blue Star, and the Fisher Paykel. These have huge burners. I'm not sure how apt they are for canning. If the person asking the question want to give me your email address, I can do some further research for you and get back to you singularly if you want.
And while we're on that topic, you had mentioned about if you have gas stove, you may need to upgrade your service, your electrical service. What if you have a contemporary modern electric stove, induction, and you want to swap it out for an induction? So you have resistance electric and you're thinking about an induction electric. Are they going to use about the same amperage?
Depends. It really depends. Some again, you can buy a Bosch that's 40 amp. You can buy some, most of the ranges now are 50 amp. I think electric ranges, depending on how old they are, can go anywhere from 40 to 50. So you may have to do some work depending on what's in there, depending what's on that circuit, and depending how many amps your current electric range. Shouldn't be that big a deal. Going from gas to induction is, however, a problem. But again, you shouldn't have that big a problem with electric. That said, I'm hoping that you have 10 extra amps.
Yep. We were, I guess, fortunate. We went from resistance electric to induction and had enough current to be able to make that swap. But
typically, they'll put 50 on a circuit. That said, I'll say, yeah, they put 50 on a circuit, and then my luck will be 30 or 40. But yeah, I think you shouldn't have a problem if you have electric there now. Knock on wood.
I say back to you, John. How do the NO1, NO2 levels indoors generally compare to the outdoor EPA standards? Should we worry about risks even if the house doesn't exceed the EPA outdoor standards?
Yeah, so I'm a two-part answer there. So first, you can definitely get levels indoors that exceed what you see for the ambient air quality standard. So that, I think there's been recent studies, and I can't remember the percentage, but that a reasonable number of homes you have measurements that are in excess of the standard, which is, of course, based on outdoor exposures. Whether you should be worried about health effects if you're below the standard, I think it's still something to keep in mind that the standards are not meant as zero risk thresholds. So it's not saying, if the standard is 53 and you're at 52, there's no possible risk. Like a lot of things, it depends on the circumstances of your household. Like if you have an asthmatic kid, you might be much more concerned than if nobody has respiratory, issues in your household. The other thing to say, of course, is that, this is framed around the swap out of, gas stoves, to induction. But, if you're not able to do that or not able to do it in a timely fashion, there are still things you can do to bring your exposures down with a gas stove. I mean, foremost being, having that range hood installed with enough CFM to pull the air out of the house, and obviously not having it recirculating, having it vented outdoors. And there's other sort of smaller steps that you could take. So, I do think for everyone, exposure reduction can happen and is a pretty wise thing to do, even if you don't think you're exceeding the standard.
Okay.
Best piece of advice is open a window too. A lot of these homes in the city are ventless. Open a window, get an air cleaner. Again, these LEED certification programs keep that air in a lot. It's not like a drafty brownstone. Some of these buildings are now airtight. So
Yeah.
open a window, get an air cleaner, do what you have to do. But if you cook a lot, you're gonna have a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100% agree. I mean, to Steve's point, I mentioned at the beginning air exchange. So if you have a tighter home, that's just going to amplify the effect of indoor sources. It's going to help you with the outdoor sources coming in, but the effect of your indoor sources is going to be that much. So if you have a tight energy efficient home, those indoor sources are more of a problem. And so then you have to do more with, whether the range hood, opening windows, or other things, opening windows during the cooking period to try to reduce that impact.
We have a induction stove now, but it was before it was gas and that was electric. Anyway, it's vented. It's on an inside wall. So it's not an outside wall, the stove. Sort of like your picture, Steve, you showed. But anyway, it's vented to the basement. Not a living space, but I was surprised when I saw that on week 1 living in the new house. I can see from you shaking your head, you don't think that's a great idea.
It's a bad idea. It's a really bad idea.
That
It's amazing. I think gas boilers are regulated, are they not? But gas ranges aren't. I really think that, again, with this move to cooking and this move to powerful burners, I think a lot of this, I still think electrifying is right, but I think a lot of this problems can be mitigated with good ventilation. But it seems like manufacturers keep putting out stuff that doesn't work. KitchenAid's got a new over-the-range microwave. It's 12 inches deep. You're cooking at burners that are 23 inches, right? You've got over-the-range microwaves. They're 16 inches deep, 350 CFM, no capture area, downdrafts. If you're cooking and you're going to go down into your basement, I mean, it's not going to work. And then all this stuff's going to stay in your house. And then, it's bad for seniors, it's bad for kids. And, I mean, the numbers show it. You get all these asthma problems, and you can ventilate and solve most of this, really.
We have a question about the quality issues of you mentioned these, Steve's, of induction stoves. I've heard this too. People say, well, gas is just dirt simple as a cooking medium, and resistance electric is pretty simple. And now induction stoves, I don't understand. They got computers controlling everything, and I don't even understand how they work. What would be your response to this question of induction cooking is just too complicated?
Well, it's funny. I always get this, everything's got computers. And my answer is, when was the last time your microwave went out? Microwaves have had computers for how long? It's The problem is that with induction ranges, and you don't see it in induction cooktops because the amperage is so much lower. But the reason why you're seeing higher rates is because, you know, it uses the whole circuit. And when the circuit trips, that's when you have a problem. But as far as the electronics are concerned, the only issues to induction as far as that's concerned are two things: is A, the availability, because the induction drivers are in worldwide shortage, and B, getting parts. But getting parts for anything right now, post-pandemic, is difficult. I think, you know, again, I think induction's a far better way of cooking. And again, if you don't have spikes and you get a smoother, or whatever the electrician said it was, I think he told me smoother, you'll be fine. Induction as a source, as a cooktop source, is very reliable. When you put it with a range, less so, depending on where you live.
Okay.
But it's easy. I mean, it's so simple. So much easier on the simmer because it doesn't burn out. So I respectfully disagree.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, so someone who doesn't really care what goes on behind the scenes, it seems very easy to me. It seems really no different. But speaking of which, I've had gas, I've had electric, and now I have induction. If without changing my cooking style, what is this doing to my utility bill when I go from one to the other? Is it going to reduce my expenses, increase them? Overall, I realize I'm trading my gas bill for my electric bill, but overall, what's it going to do?
You know, it's a very good question. But the answer to that question is the stove is, it really depends on how much you cook, I suspect. But really, in my experience, the one appliance that you need to worry about is not your stove, it's your dryer. You know, if you got a standard dryer, you're paying in Massachusetts, you know, what, 28 cents per kilowatt hour. Last time I checked, 28.4. You know, the average dryer is about, what, 35. It's about $1 a load. You're not spending $1 per time you bake. So I think you should worry about your dryer first. I don't see an induction range for someone who's using it an hour or two a day is something that you have to worry about in your electric bill.
Even with that big 50 amp cable going into your stove. Is that
Yeah,
just you?
Yeah, I don't see it as such. I haven't done any direct research on it. But I have on dryers, and that's the most expensive single appliance in your house. I don't see it for induction.
Hmm.
You know, and another unintended expense is on my older electric stove. I melted 2 pots. And as you said, I turned on the wrong burner. And as you said, within induction, if you don't have a pot on that ring, it's not gonna melt the pot. You know, it's
Can't turn it on.
Yeah, but that just may have been my particular problem. Okay, another question's come in from Gene here. My son's New York apartment has a gas range with a hood that is just a fan that exhausts it into the kitchen. This is what is, I think, pretty common. Is this doing anything to decrease the NOx levels in your house? Just having a vent in the kitchen?
No is the short answer. And if anything, it's making things worse sometimes.
It works.
There have been folks that have shown that you're doing a wonderful job of taking the pollution and mixing it together into the living space. So that does, again, something between nothing and making things worse. So yeah, there are, you know, certainly fans can help with certain things, and if there's some sort of a filter, you know, sort of particle-based pollution, you might get a little bit of kind of draw on there. But yeah, for NOx, that's not helping you.
Not just that, but you know, if you ever look at a recirculating fan, where does it blow? It blows back right in your face. Blows right at your nose.
Right.
The only way, I'm sorry, I'm making light of someone's situation. I apologize. But really, what you might want to do is, if you're really intent on getting a hood, get one of those triangular types. Because what they do is they get a carbon-based filter, which, to Professor Levy's point, is not any better. but at least it vents it on either side that way, so it's not directly in your face. Yeah, I agree. You're better off not turning it on and opening a window and getting in there. Some kind of like I mean I don't know. Do the Sharp air cleaners? Do they? Would you recommend those for helping, Professor?
Yeah, those don't do too much. A lot of the air cleaners do a really nice job with particle pollution,
Yeah.
but not so much with NO2. And parenthetically, I mean, I think Steve alluded to this earlier. I mean, when you're cooking, even if you're not using a gas stove, you are sometimes generating still forms of pollution, like especially if you're frying, doing stuff with a lot of oil, you're getting particle pollution off of that, and that's something that both ventilation and filters can help you with that. So you do want to think about the NO2 and the gas stove, but you don't want to only think about that part. Like the cooking process itself, independent of fuel type, can also contribute indoor pollution.
That's a
John,
good
this is going a little bit further afield, but from a climate perspective, are there other combustion sources or other sources of indoor air pollution that are more problematic than cooking stoves in your house that you would that would drive you to do, other changes before your cook stove?
I mean, right, intuitively, right, I mean, from a climate perspective, you're trying to really reduce your energy footprint is what you're trying to do. And
Mhm.
my hunch is you're using a whole lot more natural gas with your gas heat or gas hot water or a gas fired dryer than you would on the gas stove. So, to my earlier point, right, if all you do is swap out the gas stove and you still have gas fueling everything else, you've only taken a little bit off of your carbon footprint and contribution to climate. If by swapping out the gas stove, that kind of triggers a more widespread electrification of the household, then you have a much greater opportunity to reduce your carbon footprint. There's of course a big asterisk there. Where's the electricity coming from? What's being used to generate it? But that's a whole another topic for another day.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's
I was
probably-
really just wondering, are there other indoor air pollutants that come from, the dryer or, the furnace
dryers-
fumes
dry-
leak into your house?
Dryers vented out
Yeah.
typically, and the new heat pumps are recirculated, so you're not going to get much out of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, again, I think the stove is pretty unique as a gas-fired appliance that is not mandated to be vented to the outdoors.
Okay.
As I think we're saying too, I've often heard the gas stove is the gateway appliance that people, for whatever reason, feel like I need a gas stove, so I need gas in the house, and therefore, well, it makes an easier step to do the furnace, the water heater, the dryer, whatever else.
I honestly believe induction's way better to cook for the way most people cook than gases.
Let me follow up. We got a question exactly on that. Would you say it's as easy to control the temperature of the pans on an induction as it is on a gas stove?
Easier, especially at a low. Remember, in a gas, you can't really simmer because, at a certain level, the oxygen goes out, right? So you can't really simmer. Even thermidors, simmer burners are on off. It doesn't keep them maintained. You could get a induction cooktop to go to 1 watt if you wanted to, right? So it gives you the good thing that gas does do is it gets high and then it gets low, but induction does that as well, right? You don't have that waiting period in electric where you go from high to low. The glass is going to cool, the burner's going to cool, the glass is going to cool, the pot's going to cool. That's why people don't like electric. With induction, it's all instant, just like gas, and you get a much lower temperature in induction and a much better simmer and a much better response at lower temperatures than you would gas.
Is there any demand yet for restaurants to switch to induction stoves, or are they just not heavy duty enough?
You would think there would be. I've seen some restaurants with induction because, when you get these big gas ranges, first of all, I don't know if you're going to get an induction range like a commercial range, right? But what do you see in a restaurant? You see that big hood, and it gets incredibly hot, and you get really hot burners that people are scalding themselves on and everything. You won't have that in induction, right? I think they just need to get past the fact this is the way they always did it, right? You know, this is the way I only cook in gas and that's all I do and everything else, you know, get over it, right? You know, we gotta move on. Once they do, I think people would love it, really.
Another very practical question, sort of on this same topic, is we know with induction, as you said, you're going to have different pots and pans you're going to need. You make any recommendations for the people who come in and say, well, what do I need for pots and pans? Any particular types of pots and pans or brands, or where do you recommend they go?
We sell our own, and I'm not going to plug us because that's not what I do. But anything a magnet sticks to, you'll be fine. You know, typically you want to look at the ferrous content. Higher the ferrous content, the better off you are. But typically, all of them, all the manufacturers have got the message now, right? That they need to work with induction ranges. So I think All Clad's good. I think Viking's good if you want to spend that kind of dough. But really, just a good set of pots and pans. Metal pots and pans should be fine.
You know, personally, when aluminum pans came out, my parents got rid of all their big, heavy cast iron frying pans and pots, and they went in the garbage. And these brand new lightweight, very lightweight things. And now we reverted back to these nice, big, substantial, which we find that cast iron does very well for us.
Yeah, you can get a nice. I have our set of induction pans. They're fine, right? They're fine, and they're not expensive. You don't have to spend a fortune to get induction. It's not like you go to a Salad Master or wait through a seminar to be told it's like $4,000 for a set of pans. It doesn't have to be that way.
So if I want to move to an induction, I want people on the attendees here, are the prices coming down? They did seem so expensive 5 years ago.
They were very expensive in the 90s. They were coming down, but now the drivers are like there's a part to it, some kind of part of the induction burners that's on like worldwide shortage. So really any kind of, you're going to have two problems. A, the prices are not coming down. Induction's not being promoted like the other range, like the other. Typically what you want to do appliances is wait for holiday and buy your appliances because manufacturers for some reason take 10 to 35% off. That's how you buy them, except for induction ranges because very little inventory and the prices aren't coming down. I think they will once they sort out the supply issue, but not right now. I think in the next 2 years, it is what it is, I think. And when they figure that out, I think you see induction fall.
Okay.
And where's the innovation going to be happening with induction stoves? Do you see any major changes in that area, or are they they've gotten to where they're going to be?
It's very interesting. You would say that. Probably the most innovative thing came out 10 years ago. It's the Freedom, where you can, I don't know if you've ever seen the Thermal Freedom cooktop, where you can put it on left, go to right, and it tracks with sensors. I think you see a lot of what's happening in induction, happening in gas. You're getting higher wattage burners. You're getting more like bridge elements, more functionality that way. Interesting enough, Thermo's got the Liberty where you can go back to forth, not side by side, and they just put that in their range. Really, that's all you're going to get is back to forth, side by side. But I haven't seen that kind of real, disruptive technology in induction in quite some time. But you are getting better output. You're getting that super burn in the middle of the griddles on either side, and typically that's been repeated by all the other manufacturers. What's interesting is you combine it with the range. That's where you find really the distinctiveness or the uniqueness.
And a question for you, John, and feel free if we're crossing boundaries here you don't want to get into, but there's some people who feel like the fossil fuel industry, the gas industry, has been discrediting the research on indoor pollution because they have a lot invested in, of course, in the same way that in the 70s and the 80s, the tobacco industry discredited that. And Have you personally felt that, or any sort of in your research, in your work, any pushback?
I mean, I could definitely tell some stories. That definitely is the case. I mentioned earlier there was that fascinating NPR story that was, I think there was a much longer report attached to it. I can provide the link if helpful. It came out earlier this week, right? That talked about how the gas industry really from the early 70s onward was engaged in a pretty systematic campaign to discredit the science on indoor air pollution and gas stoves. And they funded their own research studies. They put a lot of things out to sort of try to discredit. They had PR campaigns, and that's continued to contemporary times. There's an article in the New York Times just this year about some consultants that the gas industry had hired to try to debunk the science. So it's a complicated and twisted road, but I think certainly there's been a pretty sustained campaign to kind of muddy the waters, and that's in part why I led with the slides that I did. Right? I mean, there's always scientific uncertainty, and we don't have all these things nailed down, and of course, some people have higher exposures, some have lower exposures. But thanks for putting on the chat, Jeff. So, but the basics are just so clear and have been known for forever, right? You burn a fuel, you get nitrogen dioxide. You get exposed to a lot of nitrogen dioxide, there's a respiratory risk. You put it indoors, you get more exposure. Like, you can't argue with any of those points, and those have been known for 50 plus years. So there's been a lot of hand waving and a lot of sort of look over there and alternative forms of science, but right, the basics here are pretty simple, and we just forget it periodically, or at least don't pay as much attention to it. Again, so sort of a tangent, but I do think like gas stoves and other appliances in our home, they're so much a part of our everyday lives. We're cooking, we're interacting with them, and you just don't think about them in the same way that you think about like smokestacks or a really big plume coming out from a diesel truck or something. It's just kind of part of your day to day, and so you just don't think about the risk in the same way as you do all these outdoor sources. But again, like the basics are really hard to argue against. And I would encourage everyone to read that article. It's a really long read, but it's utterly fascinating. The article that's in the chat.
Yeah, you'll see it in the chat. The article. I will take a look at that. Well, that made good sort of wrap up here. Your statement, but I do want to open up. Are there any final questions from anybody? Any final comments you want to make from given what you've heard here? Oh, I just noticed one last question came in. A quick one for cast iron. Do you use a silicone protector? Are you able to use cast iron directly on the cook pot, on the cook surface, cooktop?
I'm not supposedly officially going to say this. However, way back when GE was first came out with their cooktops, they used to tape $100 bill and then boil a pot of water on it. Now, we had a chef years ago that used to use what's called a silplat. It was a rubber coating he put over the burner when he cooked. Right? I don't know how long he cooked for, but I saw him cook with it. So can you put a protector over the burner so when you spill something or you don't scratch the surface? I've seen it done. I don't know how long you can do it, but again, you're getting residual heat from the pot down. So eventually it's probably going to be a problem, but I think for a short period of time, it's okay for what I've seen.
But you don't need it. You can put the cast iron right on the.
Yeah, they're probably talking about scratches or something like that.
Yeah. We just put it right on the burner. Or
yeah, I mean, if you break that's 1/4-inch tempered glass, you're really gonna need to go after it to break it. So it's not breakable normally.
Personally, once or twice, because the bottom of a pan was a little wet, we just put paper towels down and put the pan on the paper towel and cooked with it like that. Never had the towel doesn't get a problem.
Nope.
I don't know if that's recommended or not. Well, let me bring this to a close by thanking our panelists very much. Very informative session. I hope those who are thinking about induction have some information to go on. I thought it was a very balanced presentation from both our speakers. I want to say if you enjoy this topic, want to learn more, Energize Wayland has a session on induction cooking, just happens to be on October 25th. That was a coincidence. So you can go to Energize Wayland website and they may have a different perspective and different information on that. Also, the next MetroWest Climate Solution session is going to be on stretch codes. These are updated building codes to increase the efficiency of new construction. And that's going to be on November 9th at 7 p.m. at First Parish, both in person, First Parish Weston, in person and online. So if you're at all interested in building codes and what's going to come up in our town meetings in Weston and Wayland, at least, then come join that session. Again, if you want to get information about this, go to MetroWestClimateSolutions.org and you can find out more information about these sessions. So once again, thank you both, our panelists, for giving us your time, your wisdom, your experience in this field. Very helpful. This is available, will be available on YouTube and distributed as well that way. So thank you all, and we will close out this evening's session. So long.
Thank you.